Hey, I have a question for you. Here's my question. Do any of you read warning labels? No? Half? Maybe? Maybe not so much? Does anyone really know what will happen if you rip the tag off your mattress? Does it come completely unthreaded? Like, I'm curious. I haven't done it. But have you realized that warning labels pretty much come on everything? Everything has a warning label. Here's some of my favorites that I found this week. Here's the first one. If I turn my clicker on. Here's my first one. It's a hidden geode excavation set. But the warning is this. This set contains goggles that should not be used as protective eyewear. They are used to simulate safety and will not provide protection. Like, what kind of warning label is that? Here's another one. I don't know what article of clothing this is from, but it gives you some washing instructions. Then it says, do not wear for sumo wrestling. So I'm like, okay, great. But here's probably my personal favorite. Here's my personal favorite that I found this week. This is a real warning label. Danger, do not hold the wrong end of a chainsaw. Now, to think about that, right? Warning labels are on everything, but somebody had to hold the wrong end of a chainsaw for that to become a warning label. Someone made a dumb decision, and then someone said, hey, what we need to do is we need to give them some sound advice. We need to put a sticker on this so other people don't make the same decision that they do. But here's what I find really interesting. Maybe you find it interesting as well. Do you know what doesn't come with a warning label? Do you know what doesn't come with a warning label? Here. Raising kids, right? Okay, let's just categorize this in one big category to say what doesn't come with a warning label is life. Life doesn't come with a warning label. You don't get one when you get married. You don't get one when you have kids. You don't get one when you start a new job. You don't get one when you buy a house. No one ever, throughout any point in my life, has handed me a little tag that says, warning, the thing that you love the most may hurt you the most in the future. No one's ever handed me a tag that says, warning, you're going to face things that you didn't see coming. No one's ever handed me a tag that says, warning, someday you're going to feel like your life is out of control. But here's what I think is true, right? Here's what I think is true. Life doesn't come with a warning label, but it does come with a guarantee. Life doesn't come with a warning label, but it does come with a guarantee. If you have your Bible, we're going to study together this morning Acts chapter 27. Acts chapter 27. You can go and flip there. But here's the question that I think Acts 27 is going to help us answer. And the question is this: how do we trust God when everything is going wrong? How do we trust God when everything is going wrong? Because here's the guarantee. A storm is coming. A hardship is about to happen. A plot twist is nearby. Turbulence in your life will take place. There will be times when our lives are out of control. Here's how others have said this. They've said storms in life are a certainty. They are a guarantee. And the reality is you're either in one, coming out of one, or preparing for one. I don't know where your week has led. I don't know the things that you faced over the last 6 weeks or last month. I don't know what's about to come for you, but I think that is true for all of us. Some of you in this room, I know your story, in the last few weeks have been a storm. It's been a hardship. There's been some turbulence. There's been some things that have felt like you're out of control. For some of us, we're coming out of that season to say, hey, the storm happened. Now I'm just trying to figure out, how do I put the pieces back together? And for some of us, the reality is, I love you enough to tell you that a storm is coming. Something in your life is about to happen. And this may be in your marriage, it may be in your family, it may be with a child, it may be at work, it may be in your health or in the health of someone you love, it may be in your finances, but the guarantee of life is this, that storms will happen. And here's the thing. What we're going to find out in Acts chapter 27, we can either let those storms wreck our ship, or we can learn to trust God when everything seems like it's out of control. So if you have your Bible, Acts 27, here's the context. If you've been with us, you've known that we've just studied verse by verse through the book of Acts over the last little while. But here's what's happening. Paul, we've been tracing the story of this guy named Paul, the Apostle Paul. And Paul's been out on this journey planting churches and reaching people for Jesus and starting more churches. And all along the way, there's been things that have been out of his control. He's been shipwrecked, he's been all beaten, he's been put in jail, and all these different things. And over the last few chapters, we've just kind of journeyed with Paul as Paul's in this final season of jail time. So he's been on trial before this guy named Felix. He's been on trial before this guy named Festus. He's been on trial before this guy named King Agrippa. And then what he does is he appeals to Caesar. He says, hey, the state level Supreme Court's not where I want to be. Let's take this to the national level. Let's make national news with this case. And what we're going to pick up in Acts 27 is just that. Paul is now on a ship. We'll find out at the end of chapter 27, he's on a ship with 276 other people. So it's a big boat. So don't think like Jesus and the 12 disciples in a little canoe paddling through the Sea of Galilee catching some fish. Think like this is a big merchant ship of the day. They're hauling grain, they're hauling a lot of cargo, and they're hauling 276 people. And Paul is on his way to Rome. But here's where we're going to pick up in verse 9. Verse 9, it says this: By now, much time had passed, and the voyage was already dangerous. Since the Day of Atonement was already over, Paul gave his advice and told them, Men, I can see that this voyage is headed towards disaster and heavy loss, not only of the cargo and the ship, but also of our lives. But the centurion paid attention to the captain and owner of the ship rather than to what Paul said. Since the harbor was unsuitable to winter in, the majority decided to set sail from there, hoping somehow to reach Phoenix, a harbor on Crete facing the southwest and northwest, and winter there. Now, what I really think is interesting is what we know is written before this is 2 Corinthians chapter 11. And what we know is written in 2 Corinthians chapter 11 is Paul is telling some of the hardships that his life has faced. As he's been on ministry, out doing ministry for Jesus, for God, he's faced a bunch of hardships. One of those things that he says in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 25 is that he's been shipwrecked 3 times. So he knows all of the signs of a shipwreck about to take place because he's experienced. He's kind of like collecting these shipwreck stories. And he comes to these guys and he says, hey, let's be honest. I'm seeing something that maybe you don't see. A storm is coming. The ship's about to get wrecked. This is already dangerous. It's only going to get more dangerous. Okay? And he says, I've seen how this plays out before. Now, here's what some scholars would tell you. Scholars would tell you that they believe Paul and this boat set out on their journey sometime in the middle of August. Okay? They set out in the middle of August. This was supposed to be a 2 to 3 week at most journey. And now, what we know, because Luke records, that the Day of Atonement has already passed. Scholars will tell you that in 59 AD, when they believe this was taking place, the Day of Atonement was October 5th. So what was supposed to take them 2 weeks has now taken them 6 weeks. And Paul's like, hey, this is already dangerous. Okay? This has already not gone the way it was supposed to go. The Romans at this time would have said, hey, sailing after September 15th is considered a death sentence. They knew that this was storm season. So Paul is giving them this warning. He said, hey, here's the warning, right? I've seen how this plays out. A storm is coming. It's storm season. Hurricanes are about to happen. Everything is about to go wrong. And in the rest of this chapter, we get to see how we can answer that question. How do we trust God when everything is going wrong? And the answer to that question, or to answer that question, we first have to understand some things about life, because life doesn't come with a warning label, but it does come with a guarantee. Continuing on, verse 13. So now they're on their way, right? They're sailing from what scholars would tell us a place called Fair Havens to Phoenix. That's not Arizona, but it seems like a good place to winter. Okay, but here's where they're going. They're on their way from Fair Havens to Phoenix to that harbor to spend the winter there. And it says this, verse 13. When a gentle south wind sprang up, they thought they had achieved their purpose. They weighed anchor and sailed along the shore of Crete, but before long, a fierce wind called the northeaster rushed down from the island. Now let's pause there again, because here's the first thing we have to understand about life. Life doesn't come with a warning label, but it does come with a guarantee. And these 3 points that I have, you're going to look at them and you're going to be like, this is nothing new. I'm not going to teach you anything new this morning. I'm probably just going to point out something that sometimes we forget in the storms, or when we come through the storms, we were wishing we would have remembered. Okay? But here's the first point. The first point is this: life doesn't play fair. Life doesn't play fair. If we were to go back into those 2 verses, here's what's happening, right? They get exactly what they want. We want to go from Fair Havens to Phoenix. Okay? We have to go around the bottom of the island of Crete, and they get a gentle, slow-moving, easy-sailing wind pushing them in the direction that they want to go. And they say, hey, we've achieved our purpose. We've weighed anchor, which means they just pulled the anchors up so they didn't have as much drag, and they began to take sail. They made a decision. The decision looked promising, but then all of a sudden, verse 14 jumps in, right? And then out of nowhere, a storm. And now, I don't know if you've done this, but I, personally, don't go around naming storms. People do that. But what is interesting in this chapter is this storm has a name. So it's not your average Tuesday rain shower. Like, this is a fierce storm. People from outside of the Bible, people who would disagree from the Bible, who are historians, have studied this chapter for years and years and years to help determine some of the weather patterns of the seas at this time in the season. Okay? So there's this fierce storm, the northeaster. It comes along and instantly takes what they look like they've achieved and spins it back around, because life doesn't play fair. Here's what I find is interesting. From Fair Havens to Phoenix, from harbor to harbor, where they were to where they wanted to go, was 40 miles. So another 2 to 3 days on sea is what they were thinking. This storm picks up, and here's what scholars would say. They think that this storm blew them 600 miles off course in the opposite direction. Life doesn't play fair. Here's what this made me think of this week. Have you ever been to like a county fair or carnival and you see the one carny like playing the bowling ball in the track game, and every time he wins a prize, and then you give him your $5 and suddenly the bowling ball doesn't make it up the first hill, right? Did you know all of those games are rigged? Okay, good, right? But life doesn't play fair. That's the illustration, right? Sometimes it looks like one person can do the same thing, make the same decision over and over and over again, and it always leads to a positive outcome for them. Then we make the same decision, and then bam, smacked with the northeaster. Life goes a completely different direction. We're blown 600 miles off course. You make the best decision you know how, and you still get hit with an unexpected wind. I like to think that these guys were thinking, hey, they probably thought the same thing that we think. They're like, we're finally getting somewhere. Maybe in your life, this is like, hey, we're finally making headway in that debt that we've stacked up. And then all of a sudden, bam, the car breaks down. All of a sudden, bam, medical emergency. And it's like, now we're just piling the debt right back on. I thought we were getting somewhere. But life doesn't play fair. Let's continue on verse 15. Verse 15. Since the ship was caught and unable to head into the wind, we gave way to it, which just means we gave into the wind. And we were driven along 600 miles off course. After running under the shelter of a little island called Judea, we were barely able to get control of the skiff. Now, pause, because a skiff, unless you're a seasoned sailor here, which I'm not, a skiff is their term that they would use for like a life raft. So a skiff hung off the edge of the boat, and it was the life raft in case all things went wrong on the ship. We at least have the skiff. Somehow these waves are high enough that they're hitting the skiff. Okay, so they're slowing them down. They're causing them to spin 360s. I don't know, right? But they couldn't get control of it. Then it says this: after hoisting it up, they used the ropes and tackles to gird the ship, which means this: they threw ropes around the outside of the ship and basically created an exoskeleton for the ship. They used ropes to try to tie the ship together. Waves were getting so bad that they were fearful that the ship was going to break apart. So they're using ropes, anything that they have, to tie the ship together, at least to prolong the damage. Fearing they would run aground on the Syrtis, they lowered the drift anchor, and in this way they were driven along. Because we were being severely battered by the storm, They began to jettison the cargo the next day, just throw it overboard. On the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. I love that Luke records this, again, because I don't think any of us are seasoned sailors, but this is what you need to know. The tackle was how they steered the ship. It was essentially the steering wheel. They didn't have a steering wheel. They had two ropes called the tackle. And if they wanted to turn the rudder left, they would pull the right rope. If they wanted to turn the rudder right, they would pull the left rope. All the things, right? So they said, hey, this isn't going well. We'll just throw the ropes over the board. We don't even need to steer this ship anymore. We know where this is headed. Okay? So they throw the tackle overboard. For many days, neither sun nor stars appeared, which just means they were close to Ohio. And the severe storm kept raging. Finally, all hope was fading that they would be saved. Since then, they had been without food for a long time. Paul stood up among them and said, now this is interesting, right? Because Paul, at the beginning of this chapter, gave them a warning. Here's the outcome of what's going to happen. And then he stands back up and he says this, you men should have followed my advice not to sail from Crete and sustain this damage and loss. Now I urge you to take courage, because there will be no loss of any of your lives. After he had already told them, hey, this is going to be severe destruction, the ship, the cargo, and our lives. Now he's saying, hey, I urge you to take courage. No one's going to lose their life. For last night, an angel of the God I belong to and serve stood by me and said, don't be afraid, Paul. It is necessary for you to appear before Caesar, as indeed God has graciously given you all those who are sailing with you. So take courage, men, because I believe God that it would be just the way it was told to me. But we have to run aground on some island. Here's the second thing I think we should be reminded about life, right? It's this. Life doesn't control the outcome. Storms will happen. Things will go awry in our lives. There will be times where we feel like we're out of control. But life doesn't control the outcome. Now, maybe it's because Paul's been here a few times, right? This is going on shipwreck number 4. But I find it really interesting how calm he is. He just seems very calm all throughout this chapter. He doesn't seem like he's in a panic. He doesn't seem like he's frightened. He's just like, hey, you should have took my advice, but that's okay. You didn't. We're going to get through this, right? He just seems very, very calm. Let's deviate from Paul for a second, and let's just talk about David, okay? David and Paul would have differed in this moment. David's reaction would have been this. I gave you some advice. You chose to wreck your life. Some people like to watch the world burn, right? That would have been me. That's not always the heart posture I want to have, but that's how I would have looked at this. Like, hey, I gave you some sound advice. I told you this was about to happen. But Paul's remark is not snarky. It's not mean. It's not arrogant. It's not rude. He's just like, hey, we're going to get through this. Because the God that I belong to woke me up last night and said, hey, here's what's going to happen. Nobody's going to lose their life. Take courage. Why? Because confidence in God produces calm in the chaos. Confidence in God produces calm in the chaos. Storms will happen. Everything will seem to go wrong. And so often we rush ahead to try to determine the outcome. And we do exactly what these people do. We start abandoning things in our life. We start throwing necessary things overboard. We make rash decisions, and then we come to exactly what they did in verse 20, and we just give up hope. This is the way my life will always be. I'm in one storm. These things have gone wrong. Apparently, this is just how my life plays out now, right? But life doesn't control the outcome, and sometimes God does things that make no human sense, right? Sometimes God slays giants with a boy in a slingshot. Sometimes God sends people through the fiery furnace. Sometimes God puts people in a lion's den. Sometimes God himself lays down his own life on a cross only to walk out of a grave 3 days later. None of those things make sense to me. It doesn't always make sense, but sometimes God brings a great good through a great bad. Sometimes God brings a great good through a great bad because life doesn't control the outcome. God does. I love how the author of the book of Hebrews starts his whole book. He says, hey, this is what God is doing now. This is what Jesus is doing now. He died on the cross. He rose from the grave. He's now seated at the right hand of the Father, and he's carrying the world in the direction that it was already determined to go. Now, he's not just talking about the whole world. Yes, he's talking about the whole world, but he's also talking about each and every one of our individual lives, which really makes the hard stuff feel even more crappy. It goes back to asking the question, why do bad things happen to good people? But God sometimes uses those bad things to bring a great good because God controls the outcome, not life. Storms will hit. And Paul's encouragement is to us, just like the sailors, is to take courage, to be strong, to not be afraid, and be reminded that life doesn't control the outcome, but God does. Verse 27. When the 14th night came, we were drifting in the Adriatic Sea, and about midnight, the sailors thought they were approaching land. So the storm's happening, they're blown off course. They know at this point, hey, nobody's going to lose their life, but we're probably going to lose the ship. Okay, we're going to run aground at some point in time. We've already thrown the steering wheel overboard. We have no hope. Okay? Verse 28. They took soundings and found it to be 120 feet deep. When they had sailed a little further and sounded again, they found it to be 90 feet deep. Then, fearing we might run aground on the rocks, they dropped 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for daylight to come. Some sailors tried to escape from the ship. They had let down the skiff into the sea, pretending that they were going to put out anchors from the bow. Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, "Unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved." Then the soldiers cut the rope holding the skiff and let it drop away. Here's the origin story of the Army-Navy rivalry, right? That's the origin story of the Army-Navy rivalry. Verse 33. When it was about daylight, Paul urged them all to take food, saying, "Today is the 14th day that you've been waiting and going without food, having eaten nothing. So I urge you to take some food, for this is for your survival. Since none of you will lose a hair from your head." He's getting even more specific, which I just love. After he had said these things and had taken some bread, he gave thanks to God in the presence of all of them, and after he broke it, he began to eat. They all were encouraged and took food for themselves. In all, there were 276 of us on the ship. When they had eaten enough, they had began to lighten the ship by throwing the grain overboard into the sea. Here's the third thing, right? The third thing that I think we need to be reminded about life when storms happen. Life doesn't have to cause a panic. Life doesn't have to cause a panic. I asked before I'm going to use this story or this illustration, but I did ask. I did get permission. But if you ever go out to eat with Emery will study the menu. Emery will talk about which food choices she really likes from the menu, and then the waiter will show up, and Emery just goes into panic mode, and she panic orders. I'm sure some of us do the same. I do the same, right? My wife and I went to Zenado on Wednesday night, and I looked over the menu, and I was like, wow, some of this food looks really good. And the waiter showed up, and I was just like, pizza. But that's what the sailors are doing. The sailors are panicking in this moment, right? Which is interesting because Paul just told them, hey, no one's going to die. No one's going to lose their life. That's why I find it interesting that he even gets more specific. No one's going to even lose a hair from their head, right? But the sailors have still spun themselves into panic. But here's what's happening, right? The storm is settling. The ground is now approaching. A wreck is about to happen. Destruction is inevitable. And these sailors are in a panic. Most of us in this moment would be in a panic, right? I would be in a panic. They're running around. They're running to the front of the ship like, hey, we're going to pretend like we're doing this, but we're really lowering the life raft. We're going to make a business decision here, right? It's us or them, right? And they're thinking, hey, if we just get off of this, maybe we can save ourselves. They try to abandon the ship, but the soldiers come and cut the rope after hearing Paul's advice. And what's Paul's advice? Paul's advice is this: you're not you when you're hungry, right? 14 days without food. Everyone's in a panic. The storm's taken a toll on every single person. They've gone 14 days without food, and Paul's like, hey, you're not you when you're hungry. Let's eat some food together. Let's make calm, rational decisions, right? Here's what I think Paul's helping them see. Here's what Paul's, even I think, helping us to see. Don't make permanent decisions in temporary storms. Life doesn't have to cause a panic, and panic decisions are never wise decisions. Emery never orders what she wants. It's a panic. I never order what I want. I go back to what I know. Chicken tenders, pizza, right? Chicken tenders or pizza. Panicked decisions are not wise decisions. When everything is going wrong, we shouldn't quit our faith. We don't need to abandon our community. We don't need to stop praying. We don't need to run from God. We don't need to even let fear make our decisions. Because life doesn't have to cause a panic. And in the moments where our life seem out of control, when storms are happening, panic makes us reach for control, but faith makes us reach for God. Life doesn't come with a warning label, but it does come with a guarantee. Now here's where we're going to get super practical. Because again, we're either headed towards a storm, going through a storm, or coming out of one. Storms in life are a certainty. And here's what happens in the rest of Acts chapter 28, or Acts 27, is the ship runs aground. The ship breaks apart. They swim from who knows how far offshore to an island. And then that's the place that they find refuge for what we know as the next 3 months. But none of them lost their life. God remained true through the storm. His promise remained true through the storm. So let's talk really, really honestly for a few minutes, because this is what I'm not pretending to do. I don't want you to hear me and think I'm pretending to have this all figured out. I don't want you to hear me and think that I'm pretending to know, like I know how to face all the pain that you're going to go through or face all the pain that I've gone through. I'm not even trying to minimize those things. I know some of your stories. I know some of the storms that you have been through. And going back to it, life isn't fair. Those things weren't fair. Those things caused real pain. They left real scars. They left us in situations wondering, will we ever recover from this? But can I tell you what I've seen? Here's what I've seen. Because I don't understand all the storms of life, but I've seen enough people to respond to them that I've seen that the storms of life can do two things. Okay, life can do two things. Here's the two things life can do. Life can do two things. Life can kill your faith in God. Or the second is life can cement your faith in God. Life doesn't play fair. Life doesn't control the outcome. And life doesn't have to cause a panic, but life can either kill your faith in God or it can cement it. I know of a lot of people who have both of those stories. They faced the hardship, their life was about to be a shipwreck, and they just left it all. Obviously, God doesn't love me or he wouldn't let me go through this. Why do bad things happen to good people? Right? That's the question. Or I know plenty of other people who've been in the second one. They've gone through a hardship. They've gone through something that they never saw coming. And they said, this is why I follow God. Because it doesn't make sense. But I know that he's going to get me through it. So here's the question I want to ask us. Storms don't have to determine which one of these options or which one of these plays out in our life. But our response does. And how do we trust God when everything is going wrong? I think Paul gives us a clue to that in Acts chapter 27, verse 23. Because here's what he says. We'll get to the verse in a second, but here's what Paul is really saying. God has a plan for your life. And no matter what you've gone through or no matter what you will go through, God has promised to get you safely to his final destination for your life. So here's the question. Here's a question that I think Paul's asking us. Who do you belong to? Who do you belong to? Here's Acts chapter 27, verse 23. It says, for last night, an angel of the God I belong to and serve stood by me. Paul's question, Paul's declaration really for himself was, this is who I belong to. You know why I can face the storms the way that I face the storms? Because I know who I belong to. Here's the thing that I don't know. I don't know the outcome of all of these sailors and soldiers and prisoners and everybody else on that boat. I don't know if they all came to faith in Jesus. I don't know if they all found faith in God. I think of another story of a very similar shipwreck in Jonah chapter 2. It's actually the end of Jonah chapter 1, but it goes into Jonah chapter 2. But what we know is all of those sailors came to faith in God. Their life was a wreck. Everything was out of control. Seasoned sailors were facing a storm that they've never seen coming. Seasoned sailors were facing something that they had no control over. And all of those people in that story said, hey, this was something that cemented our faith in God. And it came back to, who do you belong to? So I'm asking you this morning, who do you belong to? Because if the answer is nobody, or if the answer is myself or my job or my performance or my plans, then a storm won't just rock your boat. It will wreck it. And it will take everything with it. Because you were never anchored to anything that could hold. But if you're like Paul, and if you can say, I belong to God, like I really belong to him. I don't just know about him, but I've really anchored my hope. I've anchored my faith in the person who does control the outcome, in the person who helps me walk through storms of life with peace, in the person who made a way that I could be with him for eternity, who will get me to his final destination with safety. Then I think the second thing will be true for us. Storms will lead to life cementing our faith in God, not killing it. But it goes back to that question, who do you belong to? Now, there are some of you in this room that I don't know, and there's some of you that I know okay, and there's some of you that I know really well. But I love you all enough to say, hey, storms in life are coming. And if we want to be people who walk through those storms, and who can walk away from those storms saying, I know that God who got me through it, then we have to wrestle with this question. We have to wrestle with the who do you belong to question. I think it was interesting when Jesus stood at what was known as the gates of Hades in the first century, a real place, a place that they thought was the start of the underworld, right? And he turns to his disciples and he doesn't kick the door in, right? He doesn't just make them say who he is. He asks them the question, who do you say that I am? And for some of us, I don't know where you are this morning. For some of us, it may be, do you say that Jesus is Lord and Savior? Right? Paul would say, if you confess with your mouth and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, that he defeated life and death, then he said, hey, I promise that this is what my inheritance for you is. It's life and life abundant. And the answer is, that's how we then trust God through the storms of our life, knowing that God already conquered them. That yes, we'll face hardship. Yes, we'll face things that are out of our control. Yes, we'll face things that don't make sense. But we have a real anchor of hope. We have a real anchor that cements our lives through those. Maybe here this morning and the last few weeks have been rough. The last few weeks have been that storm. There's been uncertainty. There's been scary times. There's been moments of panic. And maybe this morning what you need to be reminded of is who you belong to. That God's still in control. The storms don't have the final say. Life doesn't control the outcome. I'm going to invite Bart to come back and play our closing song, but I want to just pray for you. Because storms in life are inevitable. They're certain. And they can either do one of two things. They can kill our faith in God or they can cement it. And my prayer for each and every one of you this week is as we face the hardships of life, that life would cement our faith in who God is. So let me pray. Lord, as I think about my own life and think about the week to come and having a new baby and Taylor going through a major surgery, I know the panic that it already brings in my own heart. Thinking back to some of the things that I've already known that I've walked through, I just look back and see a perfect track record of God showing up, a perfect track record of the reminder that you will never leave me nor forsake me. And Lord, as I go into what could be a storm, what I hope doesn't turn into a storm this week or whatever may lie in the future for each and every one of us, Lord, I pray that you would just help us to be reminded. Be reminded that life doesn't control the outcome. To be reminded that life doesn't play fair, and sometimes decisions look promising, but they lead us in the wrong direction. They blow us off course. Sometimes even just being reminded that life doesn't have to cause a panic. So Lord, my question for you is, my ask of you is this: would you help just cement our faith? Maybe this morning we're wrestling through that question. What is faith? Do I have it? Do I have enough of it? There's things in our lives that are going wishy-washy, or things that we wish would go better, and we're just asking that question. So Lord, would you meet us in that conversation? Would you just help us to be honest with you, and help us to be honest, and you just be honest with us of where we are. Lord, help us to just see the faith, and then be reminded that we can have a lot of faith, and we can have the faith the size of a mustard seed that still moves mountains. Lord, if we're here this morning and we're coming out of a storm, would you just help us to be reminded that the storm didn't win? That there were things that may seem like we're not going to recover. There may be things that got really shaken up. There may be some real damage. The ship may be wrecked. But you're still right here with us, just as you were with us in the middle of the storm. You're with us after the storm. And Lord, maybe for some of us, storm isn't even nearby. It's in the future, some point in time. But Lord, would you just help us to lean into you with enough faith to be prepared? Because storms are going to happen. Storms are certain. And you want to walk through us, and you want us to be reminded in the middle of those things that we belong to you, that we serve a God who is faithful, who is just, who is right, and who has a perfect track record. Lord, I love you, and I pray all this in your name. Amen.